Audio test testing. Testing 1 2.
Good morning. We'll call this meeting of the House Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee to order. Clerk, would you please take the roll? Everyone get logged in and enter your presence on the board. Our board is overridden by now, but clerk knows what's going on. So everybody entered. Clerk, take the roll.
Mr. Chairman, you have 13 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. This time, members, if you would stand with me, we're going to have a prayer and a pledge, and Chairman Hulsey will lead us.
Let's pray. Father, thank you for your mercy and your long suffering and your grace. And thank you for today. I pray that you will help us to be faithful. I pray for revival in this nation and to redeem our time. In Jesus' name, amen. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. Any personal orders for the day? Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is our second time meeting, I just want to resubmit. I'm going to be submitting a formal request for the Commissioner of Agriculture to come before our committee. He's testified before the Senate and answered questions. We have a new commissioner, Andy Holt, and he testified about the staggering loss that farmers are facing in the state, many of which economists have attributed to tariffs. And so just would like to see how can we come together in a bipartisan fashion to support Tennessee farmers and meet with our new ag commissioner. I know the former commissioner, Commissioner Hatcher, would always lift up the statistic that every hour we lose 10 acres of farmland. And so we know that this is a crisis impacting our state. And as the Ag Committee, it will be very helpful to have the Commissioner of Agriculture come before us. And so we can work collaboratively with the administration. Thank you.
Chairman Grills, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too want to reach out to Commissioner Holt, ask Commissioner Holt to come in, sit down and explain to us the importance of what the farmers do in this country, how important Tennessee farmers are to our economy, and to see what he would have to offer, because I would guarantee you there's going to be a lot more to be uncovered, and he's going to be able to give answers. It's going to probably surprise some of the people that are asking for him to show up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that. Any other personal orders? Seeing none, we'll get right into our fact of the day. The foundation for the College of Agriculture began with the Morrill Act of 1862, a federal law that granted public lands to states to fund colleges focused on agriculture, engineering, and applied sciences. In 1867, Congress passed legislation allowing Tennessee to access Morrill grant benefits. And in 1869, the state of Tennessee designated East Tennessee State University, now the University of Tennessee, as the state's official land grant institution. This designation required the university to provide formal instruction in agriculture and related practical disciplines. As a result, agricultural education became a core component of the university's mission, leading to the establishment of organized agricultural teaching programs that form the basis of today's College of Agriculture. Following its land grant designation, the university expanded its agricultural mission through three primary functions: instruction, research, extension, and outreach. These efforts strengthened Tennessee's agricultural economy and positioned the university as a statewide resource for agricultural innovation and education. Over time, the original agricultural programs evolved into the present-day Herbert College of Agriculture. With an average enrollment of more than 1,600 students each year, the Herbert College of Agriculture continued to reflect its land grant origins by integrating teaching, research, and public service to support Tennessee's agricultural industries and our rural communities. We want to thank the university for being a great part of this state and providing our agricultural community all that they do. At this point, we'll take up our calendar. We have this morning House Bill 1536, and I'll entertain a motion. We have a motion. We have a second. Representative Shaw, you're recognized on House Bill 1536.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I believe we need to add an amendment to the last amendment that we added. We have an amendment 13038 will replace Amendment 12909
Yes, sir.
from the Comptroller's Office.
Okay, we have a subcommittee amendment that's already on the bill traveling with it. And would you be fine with us rolling these into one amendment?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Definitely.
so we have the amendment that's traveling with it, and we have drafting code 13038 that will be rolled into that amendment, and legal will roll that into one without objection. Do we have any objections? So seeing none, that is rolled into one. And Representative Shaw, you're recognized on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the amendment, all it does is just change the reporting date. It really doesn't change anything in the bill per se. And of course, as we said in subcommittee, this Ag Innovation Education Initiative is a program that we think will broaden the footprint of agriculture and give more insight and certainly more directions, not only from the Department of Ag, but for our citizens across the state of Tennessee. And I'm open with that statement and entertain any questions that we may have from any committee members.
Okay, thank you for that. We are rolling those two into one. And so do I have a motion to do that? Motion. Have a motion. We have a second to do that. Are there any objections to doing that? Seeing none, without objection, those are rolled into one and amending the bill. Any questions for Representative Shaw?
Question on the bill.
We have, he was not recognized anyway, Representative Halsey. So you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate that very much. Representative Shaw, this, I think, one of the most comprehensive bills I've seen you offer down here, and I know you spend a lot of time on, a lot of work on it, and I appreciate that. I have some real problems with the bill. You know, we say down here that we believe in smaller government, and yet this adds more government. It adds more layers of government, not less. It adds rulemaking on top of what we already have. The public-private agreement seems to me to favor large companies or large businesses rather than the normal guy or the little guy. On top of that, it seems to me to duplicate a whole lot of efforts that we already have in place in Tennessee. You got the University of Tennessee's extension that deals with some of these very same things in agriculture. You got UT Institute of Agriculture programs. You got Tennessee State University Agriculture Education and Agribusiness programs that deal with some of these very same things. Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development does the same thing. TCAT Digital Economy and Certification and Partnerships do the same thing. The broadband and digital opportunity efforts do some of the same thing with agriculture. You already have Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, the SAR program. And last year, we launched this new AI Tennessee initiative. These are already taxpayer-funded programs to do the same thing that this bill does. And which, again, I say my biggest problem with it adds more layers of government, more bureaucracy, more rulemaking, more beating little people over the head with rules when we kind of say the opposite down here. So I appreciate your effort, but that's where I stand.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your concern and I appreciate your comments, but I think it's just the opposite. This bill is adding structure to what we are already doing in many cases. And I will admit that there seems to be some duplications in some places, but we're kind of all over the place right now. And you talked about smaller government. I think that's what this bill will do, is structure government where they will take out the waste that's already in government. That's, of course, you know, we all have opinions about legislation when we pass it here, but my whole idea is to structure agriculture, which is very vital to every citizen in the state of Tennessee. It is the only department I know that touches the lives of every citizen every day. And what I want to see us do is to structure that, because it automatically happens. So why not inform and educate our constituency how important agriculture is to us on a day-to-day basis? Because, you know, when we sit down and we do the basic things like having dinner and all those things, sometimes we don't even realize where the food come from. We want to start people early in life rather than later in life and knowing the real meaning of what agriculture is all about. And that's what I think this bill is about. So our opinion is totally different, and I can appreciate yours, but mine is totally different from that.
Thank you for that. Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the sponsor, thank you for carrying this. And I appreciate you getting back with me on the bill the other day. You know, I'd had a little bit of a hang up on the 904 section there, the public-private partnerships. I think we do too much of that in government, and the taxpayers end up paying for businesses, and we should not do that in Tennessee. Did a little more research on it. I'm with you in the intent, because I told you the story of the colleague that I had years ago, back when I was a young man, that asked me what type of tree a potato grew on. So we've got some work to do in Tennessee, but I'll have to, while I voted to get this to this level, I appreciate your follow up. I'm going to have to vote no on it too.
Representative Shaw, anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can appreciate your comments. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Representative Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a few questions that came up as concerns from members of the community and constituents. The first one is the $2 million fiscal note. Is there any idea of where the $2 million will come from annually for this bill? Because I know it's an appropriation, but usually when we have ideas for that amount of money, there's a pot of money that will come from. Is there any idea of where the $2 million will be coming from every year?
Representative Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you know, I'm finishing 26 years here, and I'm going to answer it like this. Over the past 25 years, I've been looking for $2 million. And if we get it out of this committee, I'm just going to pray we're going to find it somewhere.
Representative Jones?
My second question is that in the bill, you use the term modern agriculture, and I'm just curious, can you describe that? Because often, we know it means large-scale industrial GMO, synthetic fertilizers, and pesticides. Could you define what you mean by modern agriculture in this legislation?
Representative Shaw?
Thank you. Yes, sir. Good question. What I mean by that is that people will be educated on technology when it comes to ag, not necessarily chemicals, although chemicals are important to agriculture, but we want to make sure that the education is there. So even if it is chemicals, they'll know how to use them and use them wisely to make sure that people are safe and people who are around us are safe.
Representative Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My final question is just, I know there's been a big movement here. The governor spoke about it in his State of the State about more efficiency, cutting unnecessary costs. And my question is, I've had a great meeting with the Tennessee State University Ag Extension. We've met with UT Ag Extension. As opposed to creating a whole new entity, would it have made more sense just to give some more funding to these programs at UT, at TSU, giving it to, maybe giving a grant to FFA since we already see existing programs? Would it have made more sense just to give that money to these organizations that already exist as opposed to creating a whole new entity?
Representative Shaw?
And I can't directly answer that, Mr. Rep, because I know the department will be held responsible as to how this program is initiated, and I can't say they will give it to one way or the other. That is something that the department has agreed to do, and of course it'll be under the auspices of the comptroller who will be looking at this. So I'm not able to tell you how they are going to initiate the program step by step. I'm sorry, I don't have that answer.
Thank you, Representative Shaw. Now, at this point, folks, we do have several people else on the list, but I also have someone here that's traveled to testify on this bill, and I'd like to hear from her. If there's not objection to that, we'll do that, and then we'll continue discussion. So without objection, we'll go out of session and hear from Miss Bernadette Pager. If you would approach, you're welcome to stand at the podium. Well, there is no podium. No, way over there. The chair would be closer. And you got 3 minutes. Let us know your name, who you're with, and feel free to say what you have.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Bernadette Pager, just speaking for myself, and I'll be very quick. I do agree that Tennessee already maintains a robust multi-agency ecosystem, delivering nearly identical services in agriculture, education, digital innovation, workforce preparation, youth development, market access, and rural tech support. So this proposed $2 million recurring is adding a new bureaucratic layer that we don't need. I think within existing budget already, we could get these entities that Representative Hulsey named to come together and say, hey, let's be more efficient on these aspects and let's kick it up. When you read the description of the private entity that would qualify for this money, the only entity I could find in searching the entire state is the Tennessee Farm Bureau. And I believe that they already have sufficient funds, and I just don't feel comfortable giving $2 million to an entity that already, according to the General Assembly itself, and one key chair in particular, already wields the biggest stick in the General Assembly than any other lobbying organization. So I do oppose that. I do believe in supporting agriculture, but the will of the people is that we have free markets, free market forces determining the direction of agriculture. And a lot of us want to see a careful transition away from so many pesticides, the big GMOs. And that can't be done if the government is continuing to partner with organizations that are partnering with the German company Bayer, the German company BASF, and the Chinese company Syngenta. And they are directly partnering with the Tennessee Farm Bureau. So thank you for your time, and I hope you vote no.
Thank you. Any questions for our guest? See none. Thank you for joining us. We'll go back into session. And we have Representative Grills on the list.
Question on the bill.
He has moved previous question. Are there any objections to previous question? Seeing none, we'll be voting on House Bill 1536 as amended, and we are rolling Amendment 12756 and 13038 into one and adding those to the bill. So feel free to vote at this time. Clerk, please take the vote.
Mr. Chairman, you have 11 ayes, 5 nays.
Thank you for that. And House Bill 1536 as amended moves on to Government Operations Committee. Any other business before the committee today? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, excuse me, one more thing, just a second. We can't adjourn, we have a presentation, but no more business before the committee. We will go out of session to hear from our Tennessee Wildlife Resources Commission. So without objection, we are out of session. If you guys would approach, take your assigned seats or voluntary seats. Director, I'll let you start off. Just introduce yourselves and we'll give you a little more than 3 minutes. That's okay, since Ms. Blair is with you. Let me turn them on. Yeah. There we go. You're recognized.
All right, Jason Maxon, Executive Director for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And to my right is our Legislative Director, Blair Beatty. And to my left is our 2 Deputy Directors. First is Brandon Ware and Frank Fisk. And Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for just allowing us to come in and present before this body today. Thank you, members. Chairman had asked us some time ago if we would mind coming in and making a presentation on our wildlife management areas and how we manage our forests there. So always very appreciative of getting in front of this body to be able to tell a little bit more about the agency. So have a slide presentation with a few slides on there. But first, before I really get into that, I can't really get into the meat of the presentation without talking about the mission of the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And that is to conserve, manage, and protect fish and wildlife and their habitats for the benefit of Tennesseans and its visitors, which we all serve. So again, thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Start out with this first slide. Today, we're going to be sharing about how we manage public land for wildlife and conservation, and really for Tennessee hunters. I'll start with a high-level overview of our operations. Most of you have seen this slide before, or actually seen some of these figures. We manage 1.6 million acres of public land. Of that total, TWA has jurisdiction over 550,000 acres of state-owned properties. Much of the other land that we own is operated by partners. We partner with both federal and state agencies to manage these properties. Some of our federal partners are Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Forest Service, for example, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then state partners would be the Department of Agriculture and Tennessee State Parks. TWA's Wildlife and Forestry Division are responsible for land management. They have an annual operating budget of $36 million. This does include salaries and benefits. Roll to the next slide. This slide really shows the WMAs across the state and all of your areas. And so we cover obviously from the far west all the way to Johnson City in the east part of that. These are public lands that you see on here. Everything that you see highlighted in green, we call these WMAs or wildlife management areas. TWRA has almost 130 WMAs, wildlife refuges, and partner properties across the state. Now, all these areas are open for hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation. The only closures that you will see, we do have refuges, a few of those scattered across the state. Those are typically closed during the winter months for migratory bird species. Some of these areas will have 3-month closures, and that's to protect those birds as they travel on their migration routes. TWA has 160 Wildlife and Forestry Division employees. these are the boots on the ground folks that actually get the work done. I know as the Ag Committee, you can appreciate this. We're much like a farming operation. A lot of these people are running those farming operations. One of my roles at the agency before serving as director was a WMA manager. And so I worked out in West Tennessee in Chairman Grill's district. And for example, as a WMA manager out there, I was over about 30,000 acres, and we would have 4 employees that would take care of that. And that's boots on the ground folks that are actually out there getting the work done. So Chairman, you'd requested information about how we decide what types of habitat or management work that we do on these areas. We wanted you to be able to hear that straight from some of our employees. So hopefully technology today will work with us. We have a real short video to show you. I thought you probably appreciated hearing from them more than you would me. So let's see if this will work for us.
When we manage any property in this state, those goals and those management decisions should be doing 2 things. They should be promoting wildlife conservation, which in turn is going to promote more wildlife abundance, okay? And then it should be promoting opportunities. The goal should always be the more wildlife I have, the more opportunities there are to hunt them, and that means that there's more hunters that get to chase them and pursue them.
You want to make sure that the habitat that you're providing supports all life cycles of that individual species. For example, a place to breed, a place to rear your young, which is, escape cover, brooding cover, loafing cover, and then a place for food, cover, and water, which is the 3 basic essentials any living creature needs to survive. So we try to stray away from what we call random acts of conservation and just pop in little habitat pieces here and there. So what we've done, create a mosaic of all these different habitat types, which is most important. So creating that juxtaposition of different habitat types, early succession, young forest, old forest, wildlife openings, I think is the most critical part in successful wildlife management.
From my perspective, the biggest challenge is helping folks realize what's good for the wildlife is not always what they might consider or expect it to look like.
If an individual has come out here, they might look around and think that it's messy and that we're not really doing anything here. We've kind of let it grow up. It's quite the contrary. This is exactly what we want it to look like. We actually spent a little over $100,000 trying to get it to look like this versus the historic fescue cattle pasture that it used to be. Fescue doesn't really benefit wildlife in any form or fashion. So using that time and money and, through prescribed fire, getting the habitat to look like this, we have definitely enhanced this habitat for birds, small mammals, game species such as deer and turkey. So I would expect to see a more diverse array of wildlife utilizing this area than it would have before.
Forests are a priority, and healthy forests are a priority, right? And so if I were managing a forested landscape and I wanted to prioritize white oaks and hickories and everything in between, I might be writing a management plan that's 80 to 100 years. Most of these trees you see in here are probably 15 to 18, 20 years old, right? And they're a long way. These post oaks aren't producing acreage yet. And so if I sit there and think, okay, I'm going to create an oak savanna or even an oak forest long-term, that's not something that I'm doing in 2 years. That's something that's playing out over 40 to 50 years, right? And ultimately that's what, hunters want to sit under when they're, hanging a deer stand, when it's a good mast year. There's also, there's a little bit of a learning curve. When trees hit the ground at first, it doesn't look good, right? But you give it 2 or 3 years and you see, wildflowers come up that haven't been able to express themselves for 30 or 40 years. And it starts to make sense that they're not here by accident.
Our wetlands here on Pagoda are very important for our waterfowl habitats. And we do manage this very intensely for our waterfowl hunters. There's a big misconception that ducks need corn and that's the only thing they need. Which that's why we have so much moist soil production here at Pagodas, to prove that we don't have to have a great stellar corn crop and thousands of acres for that. There's a lot of stuff that people don't really realize about moist soils. When they drive by, they see a growed up field and say, well, they didn't do nothing to that this year. They didn't plant any corn. We didn't. There's no corn. There is tons of seed here. And if you dig around in the grass, we'll find tons of bugs. There's lots of invertebrates here. We'll fertilize our moist soils, we'll spray our moist soils. If we don't like what we got, we'll disc strips in them. If we don't like what comes back when we disc strips, we can reflood it, start that process over. That's the good thing about moist soils. If you don't like it, you got 2 or 3 times to retry it before you start over. If you don't like it, you can come back and plant Jack millet. So there's always a backup plan. And we don't ever do a whole unit in one thing. That way we never have a total loss.
So you have to think about it for the whole year. And so every time we get on a piece of equipment, whether it be a tractor with a chop disc or a sprayer, we decide what we're going to burn. You have to look at what's around you and what's around the field, what's around even on private property, and you have to decide what's needed here. You know, is it brood area? Is it food source? How close is it to water? You have a lot to really think about and study about. Me, I try to keep the sportsman on my mind in all that we do. And I think that makes a big difference when we go to the check station and they brag on us or they say, we see the work that y'all are putting in. That's what it's all about to me. Because ultimately, you know, they pay the license and the license is what pays me. So to me, they're really my ultimate boss.
When we manage any property.
All right. Well, that's just a snapshot of a full documentary that we'll be putting out a little bit later this week. I will make sure that all of your assistants have a copy of the full documentary as we get that. We'll have it on all of our social media posts. It'll go into more depth than we have time for today, but hopefully in it you were able to see and hear from some of our employees a lot of the work. One of the things I like about this video and why we did that is we constantly hear, well, this area has grown up. Well, we're really managing for that habitat. That is where the wildlife want to be. I think the employees did a good job of talking about that. In that video, you heard from North Cumberland WMA manager Keith Thomas. He was talking about that Odie Mills track. This was one of those early successional habitat tracks. And he said in there it cost over 100,000 acres. That's over a 2-year period. But it's a great example of how we leverage partnerships. I always say conservation doesn't happen without partnerships. Of that 100,000, TWA paid $8,200. $57,000 of that money that came for that came from Pittman and Robertson dollars. And I've talked to most of you about this several times. That's the excise tax that's put on things like firearms and ammunition as they go out the door of the manufacturers. That's big money to this agency. That money goes to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then it's distributed out to the states all across the country. And we're able to leverage those dollars and use that for match. Also, other partners that helped with that project. One of those is actually going to be in town. This is the 50th annual convention for the National Wild Turkey Federation. And when we think about the economic impact that comes into Tennessee, think about the thousands of people that will be at Opryland this week for that event. We're lucky in Nashville. We get to host several events. So hunting and fishing brings a lot of money, and SCI will be here next week, Safari Club International. These are a couple of big conventions that are held here in regards to hunting and fishing. But the NWTF, the National Wild Turkey Federation, also contributed to that project. They spent $45,500 that they donated to get into early successional habitat, and also the Nature Conservancy, a great partner of ours. They contributed funds. So again, we leveraged a lot of dollars to get that habitat on the ground at North Cumberland. Manpower is a limiting factor, so many times we will contract some of this work out. That's another way that we put money back into that local economy. We contracted with some local people there to actually get some of the work done in addition to what our staff did on that track. So as you heard the managers explain, we track management work in 3 main categories, and you can see that on this slide here. That's going to be in grasslands, forestlands, and wetlands. The agency operates on a strategic plan. We're coming up at the end in 27. We'll complete this plan and we'll start another 7-year plan. That is a habitat-based plan. We used to be on a species-based plan. Now we're really managing for different habitats all across the state to affect different species of wildlife. Leadership meets with our WMA managers. They do this on an annual basis, and basically they're setting up wildlife management plans for these areas that translates down into how these WMAs are actually operated, what might be planted on those in a given year. So all of our WMA managers have 4-year degrees. We require them to have this in wildlife biology. Many of them have advanced degrees. A lot of our managers these days have master's degrees as well. This allows them to make science-based, well-educated plans on these WMAs. Those plans can span anywhere, as you heard, on a rotational basis, anywhere from 1 to 100 years, depending on habitat type and objectives. One thing you may look at in the slide is we're able to complete work on a little over 42,000 acres. But on average, we touch closer to about 50 to 60,000. I can see Chairman Grills' brain rotating up there. He's thinking 1.6 million acres. How are you only touching that? So what's happening there is this is on a rotational schedule. So we passively manage, which is really actively managing some of these properties. There's no way you're going to touch all these in a given year. You don't want to. And so we rotate. An example might be how many grasslands we touch in a year with fire or herbicides. You don't want to touch all those acres in a given year because you have those on a rotational cycle. I always use forestry as a good example. If you own a 10,000 acre tract of forest land, you're not going to touch all your forest in 1 year. You don't want to clear cut that whole forest. You want it on a rotational schedule. And that's exactly what we're doing with these WMAs and these properties. We're touching different pieces all across there, rotating around to be able to have an impact on it for different species. Another factor that influences management work are species-specific goals. And so that tract that you saw on Odie Mills, we're managing that primarily for elk habitat, but think about all the other species that touches. That grown-up stuff that we're managing for, that early successional habitat is what we call it. It benefits quail. It benefits rabbits. It benefits turkeys. It's great fawning areas. This is what we're trying to manage for. If you build it, they won't always come. And here's what I mean by that. In North Cumberland WMA and far east Tennessee up around Caryville, you're looking at mountainous habitat. Strip mine ground is what a lot of that is. Let's just say one of your constituents reaches out and says, hey, I want a duck impoundment up there. Or they reach out to us and say, I want a waterfowl reservoir. It's not conducive for that. So certain areas of the state are conducive for certain things. Just because we build a waterfowl impoundment up there, which it wouldn't hold water, it doesn't mean ducks are going to come to it. So different areas of the state are conducive to different species. However, what we try to do all across the state is managed for multiple species on one WMA because we want users that may only squirrel hunt. We want them to be able to have a place to go squirrel hunting. Folks that only want to deer hunt. So most of these WMAs are managed for multiple uses. It's just that not all of them can be managed for elk or waterfowl as an example of that. This is an early successional slide. This is a pretty neat example of a good grassland habitat. Again, I'm going to keep saying this because we hear it. I know you all hear this as well. I'm kind of driving a point here home as you will get it. When people look at that, they say, why is TWRA letting that area grow up? Well, we're managing again for that habitat. Now, that's Bridgestone Firestone WMA. These are students. In 2025, TWRA and UT had the pleasure of hosting the National 4-H Wildlife Judging Contest. This is Bridgestone Firestone WMA up on the plateau. You saw that in the video just a minute ago, but here you can see students standing in a good example of early successional habitat. If you notice, you'll see a little what looks like dead snags in there. That's where we've run fire through that. We've tried to burn out that woody competition, so we use things like fire to be able to do that. This next slide I really like. Now, we laughed about this as we were going through the presentation, but this is an Arkansas 4-H'er that was participating in that event. She's holding a yellow fringeless orchid there, which is a very rare wildflower. She picked that wildflower. I laughed about that when I saw it, but I think they were pretty impressed to be able to see this, the professors that were out there. It's a sign of good habitat that's being created on these areas. It was the first time seeing it in real life for many of the 4-H'ers from across the country. So our work to create this type of habitat, as well as the presence of the orchid, allows our biodiversity division. These are typically species that we don't hunt. We have to protect these as a wildlife agency, and they mean a lot to our system in general. I was talking to Representative Vital just a minute ago. Many of you may have saw the news release on the red-cockaded woodpecker that the governor and the team announced back last year. It's going to be neat to bring that bird back to Tennessee and restore that population, and that should occur next year. We're working with our federal partners to see if we can get that accomplished within that year. Most everyone here obviously is familiar with forests, but here's an example of 4-H'ers again on that same trip. They're in a closed canopy forest. So one of the points that I want to make here, if you look, you don't see any sunlight beaming down on their heads. You kind of see everything really open. As a wildlife agency, we don't want to manage for a closed canopy forest. We have some of these on our property. We're typically trying to cut these. The reason is we want to daylight the forest floor. We want to be able to get sunlight there because we want what we call mid-story species. If you notice, as you look through that forest, you don't see any trees that are up there at about 10 or 12 feet tall or mid-story species. We want these species to come back, especially oak species that feed wildlife. So we're going in and thinning many of these forests to be able to get sunlight to the floor. That creates an early successional habitat and allows for mid-story species later on. That's part of that rotational cycle to be able to get the next generation of forest in there. If we don't cut some of these and daylight that floor, we don't get those species that we want. Finally, that wetland habitat. These are very important and very crucial to many migratory bird species. This type of habitat is flooded. Typically, a good wetland is only flooded for part of the year. You don't want a wetland that stays wet all year long. That becomes a dysfunctional wetland because you don't get good species that come back. You want those to dry out at some point during the year. While wetlands can be found across the state, the majority of them are found in West Tennessee, especially for many of your constituents. They all want to come to a good duck hunting spot. Most of that occurs in West Tennessee because of the Mississippi Flyway. Doesn't mean we don't have ducks in East Tennessee. We've got a really neat area in Blount County that's good and Greene County that's good, but most of those birds are going to travel that Mississippi River corridor and be out in West Tennessee. I'm about to wrap up, Mr. Chairman, so we're getting close. These are the management tools that we learn about in the wildlife field. These are the tools that we use to be able to affect the ground there on the WMAs. There's 4 primary tools that managers have at their disposal. Timber cuttings that create wildlife openings, which we've talked about. This removes things like invasives as well and helps manage growth succession. Next is the plow, which can include disking to control the vegetation or planting food plots or crops in areas. Fire is a big tool that we use. Fire used properly is one of the best tools that we have. It's one of the most inexpensive ways to be able to get good habitat on the ground. Now, we remove a lot of undesirable plants with fire. You can see a controlled burn happening there at the top left-hand corner. It looks like they've already lit a flank fire on the left, a head fire in front of them, and as you can see, that's actually a head fire. It's burning towards a backfire. That will have that ground clean, and in the spring, there will be young, green, succulent growth. It's great habitat, and then it'll grow up to give us good nesting cover for many of the species that we enjoy to hunt. We also use chemical. Chemical can include herbicides to control growth, a fertilizer to help support actually growing some of those crops. So when we talk about actively management, I'll go back to that slide. We affect the land directly, basically manipulating it using one of these management tools that we have in our toolbox. That's how we affect that. Again, it's on a rotational schedule because not all habitats need to be manipulated every year. So when you look at our budget, this is where most of our expenses are going to come from whenever you consider supplies, equipment, and maintenance. The last one is really talking about forestry and timber management. Chairman, you had specifically asked about our timber management objectives. One of the most important things for this body, we followed, at your request a few years ago, there was a bill that was introduced that we follow all the same guidelines as the Tennessee Division of Forestry, which we do. It put us a little bit behind on our schedule because we had to get that bill through, but we typically will cut somewhere around 800 to 1,000 acres of timber a year. That's about the same that the Division of Forestry is currently cutting, as far as I know. We generate about $1 million in revenue on a good year. We haven't been doing that because of that bill. It's taken us a little time to get caught back up. But we follow all their procedures, the same procedures they do to put those out for bid. That revenue comes back to the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency Wildlife Fund. Now, here's probably one thing that's different between us and the Division of Forestry about how and why we cut. Wildlife is our number one objective. We are interested in oak regeneration because this feeds things like deer, turkey, other species of wildlife. Their number one objective a lot of times is going to be more focused on merchantable timber. And so here's a good example that I would give. Actually, I have a forestry degree. So one of the examples that I always give the public whenever talking about this is, if you think about a white oak tree, you're looking for a real nice merchantable log. You're looking for something that you can look up and see 3 logs, whether those be 8-foot or 16-foot logs in. The Division of Forestry is going to look at that for merchantable timber. What can I get the biggest bang for the buck when I sell that log? We're going to look at that same tree and go, man, look at the crown on that tree. That has got a great crown. It's producing a lot of acreage for wildlife. So we're going to leave that tree in the forest, typically where they'll probably cut it. Now, we're cutting some good merchantable timber too, especially to daylight the floor. But with our number one objective being wildlife, a lot of times we'll leave those trees for wildlife benefit. A lot of the seed producers, mass producing trees, whether that be hard mass like acorns and hickory nuts, we want to leave those. Things soft mass like persimmon, pawpaw, dogwood, we'll leave a lot of those trees as well. We still want to go in and do thinnings, generate revenue as a secondary objective, but that's probably one of the biggest differences. That question was asked. I think that's where we probably differ the most. So this is a really good example of where we're putting wildlife first when we make management decisions like this, even if that means we're leaving a little bit of revenue on the table. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the presentation. We have our whole executive team here. I'm proud to say that we have 3 of our Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commissioners that have traveled in to be here should there be any questions for the commission as well. Several of them traveling in from out of town. I think Steve Jones made it. He did make it. He ran into some traffic issues, but we're thankful that the 3 of them, that's Rosemary McElhaney, Rhonda Moody, and Steve Jones. 2 of those are from the Plateau and then 1 from here in Nashville. Mr. Chairman, one other thing I'd like to remind the body of, March 11th is going to be Sportsman's Day on the Hill. We'll have several different activities. Please join us for that day. It'll be a chance to talk to a lot of outdoor organizations and different sportsmen's groups. So we'd love to have anybody that can participate. I think we had a little archery shooting competition that got a little competitive last year. We may have that again this year, but would love to have anybody there for that. So that concludes the presentation, sir, and we'll be glad to take any questions from you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate all you do. Chairman Doggett, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being with us today. I had a question for you talking about WMAs, and you may do this now. I haven't hunted those in many years, but used to. I would go up to Murray County, to Yanali, and hunt there. And one thing that I found that it was oftentimes as the sun come up, you would find yourself in a crowded situation where other hunters had. I used to also go hunt at Fort Campbell, which I think is a federal place. It's not done by the state of Tennessee. But one of the things they had up there is they had zones that were allocated by acreage, and they had a certain amount of hunters that could come in there. I was wondering if that's something that's ever been considered by the TWRA for their WMAs, just to try to maybe cut down on the overcrowdedness that you might find, because it has been heated discussions had before amongst hunters that were in some of those areas. So
that's a great question. And so what's happening all across the state is more people are getting pushed to WMAs. And people, I know Chairman's asked this question. Why keep picking on Chairman? I guess they quit doing that. But he's asked the question several times. Well, if your numbers are staying stagnant, why do you need more land? And this is a prime example. What's happening is the cost of land has gone up. We all know that. It's getting harder and harder for people to be able to buy property to hunt on. Not only that, and I'll use myself as an example, my family didn't own any land, so I would have friends that would allow me to hunt on their properties. I can no longer hunt any of those properties, and that's happening to Tennesseans all across our state. Price of hunting leases are going up to like $25 an acre all across the state. So that's pushing more hunters to the WMAs. And this is going to continue to happen more and more over time because it's getting to where it's just hard for people to afford those 2 things. And so we are changing, which makes it where less people get to hunt a certain WMA. So we have quota hunts in place that take care of the thing that Representative Doggett's asking about. And so we'll do a certain number of quota. And so like for Yanali, for example, or Cheatham WMA, especially closer to the metropolitan areas, we're trying to go to quota hunt. So we may say, all right, there can only be 100 people on this whole WMA, during this different time frame or this week period. And then we'll try to rotate out and let another 100 people use that area. But I think that problem is only going to grow. We've become a destination state to hunt. There's a lot of turkey hunters. We shifted the season based on folks wanted to shift a little bit to try to keep some of the outer state hunters from coming. The commission responded to that. I think just over time, we're going to have to respond more and have more quota hunts to deal with issues like this, sir.
Representative Doggett.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for bringing up that about the turkey season. Is there any way we can move it back to where it used to be? Because that was kind of the best opportunity for getting a big bird was that first week, but now we have to wait a week. So
here's how that is set. That is set by the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission. And March is our season setting preview. That is when the public gets to come in and actually, they can do this anytime throughout the year at any meeting, but that specific meeting is when the commission will take it up. They'll vote on that in the month of April. That's when they actually take the vote up. But yes, sir, comment in and make your request known to the commission. We get all that information to them and they do listen to that from the sportsmen, and then they vote on that in April.
Thank you, Director. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the work that y'all are doing for conservation. This weekend, our former U.S. Senator Bill Frist wrote a really beautiful op-ed, powerful op-ed about how even those of us who don't hunt rely on the work that TWRA does and the outdoors. And I just had a question about that op-ed. He talked about how there kind of has been an undue burden placed on hunters and anglers to fund TWRA, and how there should be a dedicated, sustainable source of funding in order to sustain this for the long term, since we all rely on the work that y'all are doing. Do you have any response to the op-ed that the senator wrote, or thoughts on how we can support you in your mission in that way?
I was pleased that he wrote the op-ed. I thought he did a good job outlining our financial situation and our issues. And obviously there is a bill, actually there's two out there for dedicated funding for TWRA. Yes, we would love to get all the support that we could on those bills to be able to help get dedicated funding. It's just not sustainable the way that our funding is right now. It's not just in Tennessee that this is happening, just so you know. This is pretty much all across the country. The states that are making it, most every state is seeing the same thing we're seeing, with license numbers being stagnant. And when you're primarily funded through the sale of just hunting and fishing licenses, that model no longer works. So we would love any support from anybody on this body as we roll forward with those bills. Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your time today. It's good to see you. Just three quick questions. First, do we have a history of whether most of the Tennessee forests or by region were closed canopy or sunlight on the floor?
There is pretty good forest records, yes, sir. Now, I can't quote anything like that off the top of my head, but there's really good records. And then we've had a long-standing forestry program in TWRA that's been on a rotational schedule way before this team ever took place. So that information is out there. We've done inventory of most all of our lands.
Representative Fritz.
And is what we're doing with the putting sunlight on the floor consistent with what Tennessee's native forests would have been, I guess is the question.
There were a lot more grasslands across portions of the state than there are forests. We probably have more forests now than we've ever had. But we're trying to do a little bit better job of manage some of those forests where they're not high graded so bad.
Representative Fritz.
And just one more question. I'll kind of combine a couple of things and be quiet. So the use of chemicals, and I'm assuming that means defoliants and things along with the agriculture, are we doing preemptive soil sampling and water sampling? And are we following with that to determine the pH and what constituencies, easy for me to say, that we have in the soil before and after those treatments? And then lastly, the cutting. Get lots of complaints in the Catoosa WMA when we do a cut because you leave all the stumps and all that kind of stuff. Could you just on record describe a little bit why we do that from a forestry perspective? I think it'll help those that are watching.
Director.
Yes, sir. Two things. I'll go back to the herbicides. So yeah, we use herbicides like a conventional farming practice, and we do pool soil samples. One thing that I did mention, we also do cooperative farming. We bid out things through SBC guidelines, much like what we do with our forest. And so we have farmers that are farming about 15,000 acres of state-owned lands that's under TWRA jurisdiction as well. But to answer the first part, we do pull soil samples, and then we see what the soils are like following that. So what's happening at Catoosa, we're really working hard to get that area back into what we call a savanna. And so we're going in and cutting that area, and have been for many years, really hard. And it's trying to get that setting that you saw where there's only a few trees per acre, and we're leaving those seed trees that have that in there. And so to the eye, just like any forestry operation, the first few years, it'll look pretty rough anytime you do a logging operation. But you wait till about year 3 and you see the response of deer fawns in there, quail, rabbits, turkeys. It's great brood nesting habitat. And it really, you'll see a closed canopy forest go from not having many species of wildlife in it to just sparse wildlife or lots of wildlife everywhere across that landscape.
Representative Fritz.
Chairman, just one follow-up. Are we seeing any trends on the pH in the soil based on the testing, and who does the analysis? Is it Department of Ag?
So we actually, first part, I can't answer that. I don't know. I could follow up on that. Second part, we use 2 different entities. A lot of times when we do soil testing, like the WMA managers, depending on what's available in the area, we'll either use UT. A lot of times we'll pull the samples and go with UT Extension to be able to test that soil. Sometimes we may use a private company, just if it's easier, sometimes and quicker to get that soil sample, but we have that information.
Representative Darby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I feel your pain having to put up with Monty for a few years here and talk to him regularly. But I just want, I'm sorry. No, not Monty Fritz. No, Monty Blue. I'm sorry. No, totally two different people. But I just wanted to publicly acknowledge a thank you for what y'all did with Bean Switch. You put it back on the map down there, operational, and you got a lot of duck hunters up around that area that's very grateful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, certainly. Representative Stinnett?
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, we've got pelicans in Blount County on Fort Loudon. Never seen them before. Where'd they come from?
So they're migrating through, and if anybody crossed the Tennessee River a lot this year, you probably saw them out on the Tennessee River as well. They are a migratory bird species, and we've been getting pelicans for a long time, mainly white pelicans. There are a few browns that actually came to Reelfoot many years ago. I don't know, I've not kept up with it to know. We have a whole division in there that could probably talk more about this than I could, but it's neat to be able to see those in Tennessee. I'll say that they're a pretty bird.
Representative Stinnett, any follow-up?
Thank you. Been on the lake for most of my life, and we've never seen them on Fort Loudon, but they're beautiful. And thank you for what you're doing for Tennessee.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Bain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, TWRA, for all your work. I want to start with a little context because I think it's important for framing this discussion. Regarding the shrinking revenues and the impact on our agricultural programming, I want to note that despite Tennessee's state budget nearly doubling, and this is especially striking given that just 2 years ago, this legislative body voted to give $2 billion of our tax money to some of the most profitable multinational companies in the world, most of which are not headquartered in Tennessee. But that leads me to what I'm hearing from my constituents across my district. My constituents are deeply concerned about the sale of public land. These lands are not just line items. We know that they're community resources tied to agriculture, conservation, and local economies. So my first question is, can you speak more specifically to how the current budget constraints are driving decisions to sell public land, if at all? And what does that mean for long-time programming, access for farmers in rural communities? Second, I want to ask about the Memphis Task Force and the role of immigration enforcement within that work. It was reported by Fox 13 that you all had been involved in the Memphis Task Force. And so can you clarify TWRA's current role in immigration enforcement, both state and federal? Thank you.
Director?
So the first one is, we don't intend to sell any state lands under TWRA's jurisdiction. Because of the issue that Representative Doggett brought up, I mean, our users are saying that's the number one barrier to get them into hunting and angling is access. And I understand people are saying, given your financial situation, why would you all continue to be buying lands? We're only buying lands out of our wetlands fund. And really, we've pulled that and scaled that and restricted that to just small portions of property that join an existing WMA where we don't have to add any existing staff. And much of that we put in that rotational schedule where it is passively managed. So TWRA doesn't intend to sell anything. I don't think our constituents would be happy with us if we try to do any of that, as hard as it is to find a place to hunt and fish. We were requested actually by the U.S. Marshal Service to be able to help with Memphis Safe. We did that. This is one of the things that TWRA does that a lot of people don't recognize. For example, we were out doing storm damage. We were cutting trees for our neighbors in our communities. We responded partly with TEMA, but a lot of times we'll go on our own too. If we see a need in a community, we will send folks out. So a lot of our staff were out doing things, not only responding to things like Memphis Safe, we respond to Hurricane Helene, we cut trees. We no longer have any officers in Memphis now. We assisted early on in that endeavor, but once hunting season started, just because of manpower and personnel, we pulled our folks out of there and they haven't helped since hunting season started in the fall.
Representative Bain?
Just one more follow. So you all are not currently engaged in immigration enforcement at all right now?
That is correct.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Representative Vital?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you folks from TWRA for being here. I really do appreciate the work you do, and you've touched on a couple areas, specifically land management and timber and forest, and then wildlife enhancement. I want to just touch on the positive aspects of law enforcement. We have a lot of rivers and waterways in the state. More people are owning boats and watercraft. TWRA has a big responsibility in enforcing that, especially with the amount of drownings we've had. Tell me what we're doing there to work with our local agencies to help prevent that, and what can we do to help you in that aspect from the law enforcement side?
Director?
So that's, you are correct, sir. And that's one of the things that we're highlighting in this funding bill is we're working on a lot of TVA reservoir properties. We are the entity that is responsible for making folks safe on the waterway. Sometimes we're labeled as being the bad folks out there, but ultimately we're just trying to keep people safe on the waterway and enforcing the one of the things is funding. One of the things that y'all did that helped us in the short term, it's only a short-term fix though, the wetlands money was freed up to allow us to use that for law enforcement. We've not had that opportunity available to us in the past. So that did free up some funds, pretty much a one-time deal. There's folks that are saying, well, we gave you the wetlands fund to fix the law enforcement issue. That should have fixed your budget situation. That's not true. I mean, we can show the numbers that will prove that. So we will spend that wetland reserve balance down. And when you start getting into FY29, we're in trouble again because we've spent the wetland reserve down. Now, we've got a floor on that. Chairman Watson asked us to keep $6 million, in that balance with wetland, and we will do that. That's in case any track comes available. But really funding, again, is the answer. We're pretty much operating with the same number of officers that we had. You all added 8. I think that's been about 4 to 5 years ago, where we added 8 officers, but that's the only officers that we've added like in the last 10 or 15 years to be able to add capacity to that. That is the part that's growing. There's more boaters using our waterways than ever before. We're seeing more accidents. We're doing a lot of chasing of things like kayaks. Those are vessels that have no sticker or anything. So we're spawning more kayaking incidents than we probably ever have before.
Representative Vital.
I would just reinforce to you all that I think that's one area where I think the public really believes and appreciates the value of a law enforcement officer. It's not always perceived as a law enforcement officer. It's a first responder. I know we've had multiple drownings on the Chickamauga Lake, and you are the first contact. You are there responsible with the Sheriff's Department and our rescue squad to oversee that. And I would encourage us to look at more ways as we not only increase our land, but our responsibility, but as our population increases. And as you said, we have more folks on the water. Water is a great way to use the natural resources of Tennessee. And so thank you for your efforts there. And we need to find ways to help you in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Martin.
I'm good. I'm good.
Pass. Okay. Anyone else for our guests? We really appreciate you guys being here. Do you have anything else you want to add, Director?
No, sir. Just thank you for this opportunity. We always enjoy getting in front of this body, telling a little bit more about our story. So thank you, sir, for the invite.
Glad to have you, and we may have you back. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing this with us. I think it's great education for all of us. I really appreciate that. Without objection, we'll go back into session. We're back in session. Any more? We have a Representative Martin, you're recognized.
A motion to adjourn.
We have a motion and we have a second. Any objections? Seeing none, we are adjourned.